Memory is a strange thing. It warps and bends like a river carving through bedrock, eroding some places, creating deposits in others. We trust it implicitly, yet it betrays us constantly in small ways. A childhood home we remember as vast becomes cramped when revisited as adults. A beloved film rewatched decades later contains scenes we could swear were never there before. But what happens when memory fails catastrophically? When the very foundation of your reality begins to crumble beneath your feet? I've come to believe that time isn't linear, that perhaps the dead can reach backwards, pulling at threads in the tapestry of your life until the whole thing unravels. That's the only explanation I have for what happened with Eliza. They tell me I'm sick, that my mind is fractured under stress, that none of it was real. But I know what I saw in that old photograph. I know what the newspaper archives revealed. I know the scent of her perfume lingered in rooms she had never entered. I'm writing this account while I still can, before they increase my medication again, before the treatments erase what little clarity I have left. Someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to understand that sometimes, when a stranger says, "Remember me," it's not a question of whether you recall them. It's a command reaching backward through time. The bookstore had stood on Hawthorne Avenue for nearly a century, its facade weathered like the spine of an old novel. Dust particles danced through shafts of afternoon sunlight, suspended in the silence between towering shelves. I often retreated there during lunch breaks from my architectural firm, finding comfort in the labyrinthine stacks and forgotten corners. That Wednesday in October marked 7 years since Emily's accident. 7 years since I'd held my fiancé's hand as machines breathed for her, until they didn't anymore. 7 years of existing rather than living. The anniversary always left me raw, so I had taken the afternoon off, seeking solace among forgotten stories that had nothing to do with my own. I was examining a rare edition of Borges' essays when I first felt her gaze. The weight of it, like pressure on my skin, made me look up from the book. She stood at the end of the narrow aisle, half obscured by shadow, watching me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. She appeared to be in her early 30s, roughly my age, with dark hair that fell just past her shoulders. Her clothes, a simple gray dress with a high neckline, seemed oddly formal for the setting, almost anachronistic. But it was her face that caught my attention, porcelain pale with striking green eyes that reflected no light. When our gazes met, something flashed across her features, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. She moved toward me with fluid grace, each step deliberate. "Nathan," she said, not a question but a statement. Her voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. I frowned. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" A smile touched her lips but not her eyes. "You don't remember me." "I don't think we've met. I'm usually good with faces. Memory is unreliable." She reached out as if to touch my arm, but stopped just short. "I'm Eliza." Something about the name caused an involuntary shiver. "Nice to meet you, Eliza. Though you seem to already know me. We have mutual connections." Her gaze dropped to the book in my hands. "Borges, The Garden of Forking Paths, an interesting choice. You're familiar with his work?" "Time forks perpetually toward innumerable futures. In one of them, I am your enemy, in another, your friend." She quoted without hesitation. "We've discussed it before." The certainty in her voice unsettled me. I was absolutely positive we had never met, yet she spoke with the familiarity of an old acquaintance. "I think you're confusing me with someone else." "I'm not." She glanced at her wristwatch, an antique piece with Roman numerals, and stepped back. "I should go. But we'll speak again soon, Nathan. Remember me until then." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing around a shelf. I hastily returned the book and followed, but when I reached the main aisle, she was nowhere to be seen. The elderly cashier hadn't noticed anyone matching her description leaf. I chalked it up to an odd encounter with an eccentric stranger and tried to dismiss it. But that night, her face appeared in my dreams, always just out of focus, always saying words I couldn't quite hear. The next morning, a small package awaited me outside my apartment door. No shipping label, no return address. Inside was a vintage pocket watch, nearly identical to the one Eliza had worn, except this one had stopped at 3:47. Tucked underneath, it was a note written in elegant script. "Time moves differently for me. Remember when you gave this back? I never owned such a watch. I never gave one to anyone. Yet holding it filled me with inexplicable dread, as if I had forgotten something vital, something dangerous. I placed it in my desk drawer, out of sight, but never fully out of mind. 2 weeks passed without incident. The watch remained in my drawer, though sometimes I would find it in different positions than I remembered leaving it. The spring weather turned unseasonably cold. My architectural work kept me busy with a restoration project for an old theater downtown, the kind of meticulous historical preservation that usually absorbed me completely. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In crowded streets, I'd glimpse dark hair and pale skin at the periphery of my vision, only to find no one there when I turned. At night, I'd wake to the sound of footsteps in my apartment, though I lived alone. Then came the photographs. The first appeared inserted between documents in my work briefcase, a black and white image of a woman standing before a large Victorian house. Though the picture quality was poor and aged, I recognized Eliza immediately. On the back, written in faded ink, Harrison Family Home, 1953. I told myself it had to be a relative who resembled her. The alternative made no sense. Yet a quick online search revealed the Harrison house had burned down in 1954, killing all occupants, including 29-year-old Eliza Harrison. A newspaper article from the time featured the same photograph that had appeared in my briefcase. My hands trembled as I stared at my computer screen. The woman I'd met couldn't be the same person. That was impossible. Yet their faces were identical, down to the unusual intensity of their gaze. The second photograph materialized on my refrigerator, held by a magnet I didn't recognize. This one showed Eliza in profile, standing beside a man whose face was blurred, as if in motion when the picture was taken. But what chilled me wasn't the mysterious man, it was the building behind them, the very theater I was currently restoring. The third photograph I found on my pillow one night after returning from a late dinner. It showed me, unmistakably me, standing beside Eliza in clothes I didn't own, in a place I had never been. We were smiling at each other with the easy intimacy of lovers. I threw it across the room as if it had burned me. This couldn't be happening. Photographs could be manipulated. This had to be an elaborate hoax or prank, perhaps even a case of stalking. But who would go to such lengths? And why? I considered going to the police, but quickly dismissed the idea. What would I say? That I was being haunted by a woman who died nearly 70 years ago? That someone was creating impossible photographs of us together? Instead, I did what I always do when faced with uncertainty. I researched. I spent nights poring over historical archives, learning everything I could about Eliza Harrison and the fire that claimed her life. Born in 1924 to wealthy industrialists, Eliza had been a mathematics prodigy who published several papers on theoretical physics, unusual for a woman of her time. Her focus had been on the nature of time itself and what she called memory entanglement across temporal planes. The scientific community had largely dismissed her work as fanciful speculation. The fire that destroyed the Harrison home was ruled an accident, though several newspaper accounts hinted at suspicious circumstances. Eliza had been the only body recovered. Her parents were presumed dead but never found. As I delved deeper, my sleep deteriorated. Nightmares plagued me, visions of fire, of Eliza walking through flames unharmed while calling my name. I'd wake gasping, certain that someone had been in my room, watching me. Then one rainy afternoon, she appeared again. I was alone in the partially renovated theater, measuring an ornate arch for restoration. The space was cavernous and dim, with only work lights illuminating specific areas. The rest remained in shadow. It looks exactly the same. Her voice echoed from the darkness of the balcony. Except for what hasn't been built yet. I spun around, nearly dropping my tools. How did you get in here? This is a closed construction site. Eliza descended the grand staircase, her gray dress replaced by a more modern outfit, jeans and a simple blouse. Yet still she moved with that same otherworldly grace. You found the photographs, she said. You've been researching me. Who are you really? I demanded, keeping my distance. What do you want from me? She approached until we stood mere feet apart. In the harsh work lights, I noticed something I'd missed before. Her skin had an almost translucent quality, like alabaster held up to sunlight. I told you, I'm Eliza Harrison. Eliza Harrison died in 1954. Yes. The word hung between us, simple and impossible. That's not possible. Many things that seem impossible are merely unlikely. The boundaries between moments in time are more permeable than people realize. She gestured around the theater. This place is a nexus point. For me. For you. For us. There is no us, I insisted, though my voice lacked conviction. Not yet. Not for you. Sadness crept into her expression. But there will be. You're not making any sense. I know this is difficult to understand, but we knew each other, Nathan. We loved each other. She stepped closer. Or rather, we will know each other. We will love each other. A chill ran through me despite the theater's warmth. That's not possible. Time isn't linear. It loops back on itself in ways we can't perceive. Sometimes, people can slip through those loops. She reached out, her fingers stopping just short of touching mine. I've been trying to find a way back to you. Back to me? We've never met before that day in the bookstore. We have. We will. It's all the same from where I stand. Frustration flashed across her features. Your memories will be compromised. That's why you don't remember. I backed away, shaking my head. This is insane. You're talking about time travel or ghosts or I don't even know what. Neither of those terms is quite right, she said. Think of it as memory displacement. My consciousness has become untethered from linear chronology. That's not a real thing. My research proved it was possible, theoretically. The fire proved it practically. Her voice softened. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Nathan. But now that it has, I need your help. My help with what? To anchor me. To prevent what's coming. Her form seemed to flicker momentarily, like a television with poor reception. We don't have much time. The watch, have you been winding it? The watch you left me? No, it's broken. Alarm crossed her face. It's not broken. It's counting down. You need to keep it wound. A sudden crash from elsewhere in the theater interrupted us, likely something falling in the construction area. I turned toward the sound instinctively. When I looked back, Eliza was gone. On my drive home, rain lashed against my windshield and sheets, matching the storm of confusion in my mind. None of this made sense, yet I couldn't dismiss it as mere delusion. The photographs were real. The watch was real. The newspaper archives confirming Eliza Harrison's death were real. And something about her felt real in a way I couldn't articulate, a bone-deep recognition that contradicted everything I consciously knew to be true. When I arrived home, I immediately went to my desk drawer for the watch. As Eliza had warned, the hands showed 2:19 now, having moved backward from 3:47. I wound it carefully until it ticked forward again, feeling ridiculous yet compelled. That night, I dreamed of fire consuming a grand Victorian house while a woman's voice called my name through the flames. I woke to find burn marks on my bedsheets, small, perfect circles like cigarette burns, though I didn't smoke. When I turned on the light, they disappeared, leaving the fabric intact. I began to question my sanity. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove to the address where the Harrison house had once stood. Now it was an upscale apartment complex, sterile and modern, with no trace of the tragedy that had occurred there. As I stood on the sidewalk staring up at the building, an elderly man approached me, walking his small dog. You looking for someone? He asked, his voice wavering with age. Just the history, I replied. I heard there used to be an old Victorian house here. His roomy eyes narrowed. The Harrison place. Nasty business, that. You know about it? Lived in the neighborhood my whole life. I was just a boy when it burned. He glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. They say the girl was doing experiments. Unnatural things. My mother forbade us from even mentioning the Harrisons after what happened. Experiments? What kind? Who knows? But there were rumors. He tapped his temple. People said she talked to herself. That she claimed to see people who weren't there. That she could predict things before they happened. A chill ran through me despite the warm day. And the fire? Official story was faulty wiring. Unofficial story. He shrugged. Well, some said she started it herself. Part of whatever she was working on. When they found her body, it wasn't burned, not really. Just empty somehow. Like something had hollowed her out from the inside. I thanked him and left, more disturbed than before. Back in my apartment, I retrieved the watch from my bedside table. The hands now showed 1:34. Despite having wound it the night before, it was losing time again, or counting down, as Eliza had put it. I spent the rest of the day scouring online scientific journals, looking for any mention of Eliza's research. Most of it was locked behind academic paywalls or existed only in physical archives. But I did find one paper she had published in an obscure physics journal in 1953, just months before her death. Theoretical framework for memory as a nonlinear temporal phenomenon. Implications for consciousness displacement across temporal planes. The abstract alone made my head spin with its complex mathematical formulas and esoteric terminology. But one passage stood out clearly. If consciousness is understood not as a product of the brain but as an entity that interfaces with physical matter through quantum entanglement, then it follows that consciousness might theoretically be displaced from its temporal origins under specific conditions, resulting in memory anomalies that transcend conventional understanding of cause and effect. It read like science fiction, yet it had been written nearly 7 decades ago by a woman who seemed to be haunting me across time. That evening, as I sat attempting to decipher more of Eliza's paper, a knock came at my door. Through the peephole, I saw only an empty hallway. When I cautiously opened it, I found a small cardboard box on the floor. Inside was an old leather journal, its pages yellow with age. The handwriting matched the note that had accompanied the watch, Eliza's handwriting. It appeared to be her research journal, filled with calculations, diagrams, and increasingly frantic personal entries. The final pages detailed an experiment she planned to conduct the night of the fire, something involving creating a temporal anchor and consciousness projection. The very last entry chilled me to the bone. October 17th, 1954. Tonight, I make my final attempt. The calculations are precise. If I succeed, my consciousness will be freed from linear temporal constraints. I've created the anchor as planned. Nathan will understand when the time comes. He must. Everything depends on it. If I fail, the fire will consume everything. But I cannot continue this way, watching the future unfold without being able to change what's coming. Some prices are worth paying, even if others cannot understand the cost. October 17th, 1954. The date of the fire that supposedly killed her. And who was this Nathan she mentioned? My name, written decades before my birth. The journal slipped from my trembling hands. As it hit the floor, something fell from between its pages, a small, yellowed photograph. It showed Eliza standing beside a man on the steps of the Harrison house. Though the image was faded, the man's face was clearly visible this time. It was my face. Not someone who resembled me, it was unmistakably me, dressed in clothing from the 1950s, my arm around Eliza's waist. The room seemed to tilt around me. This wasn't possible. I hadn't been born until 1988, decades after this photograph was supposedly taken. Yet there I stood, looking directly into the camera with an expression of contentment I hadn't worn since before Emily's death. I stumbled to my bedroom and retrieved the watch. The hands now pointed to 12:51. That night, I didn't even attempt to sleep. Instead, I read through Eliza's journal repeatedly, trying to understand her theories. Much of it was beyond my comprehension, complex physics and metaphysics intertwined with philosophical conjecture. But gradually, a terrifying picture emerged. Eliza had believed that time was not linear but layered, with all moments existing simultaneously. She had theorized that consciousness could move between these layers under certain conditions, particularly when anchored by powerful emotional connections or significant places. The theater I was restoring figured prominently in her calculations, a nexus point, where temporal planes intersected more thinly. And throughout the journal, she referenced a man named Nathan, a man she loved, a man she was trying to reach across time. A man she believed was key to preventing some unspecified catastrophe. According to her final entries, she had deliberately caused the fire as part of her experiment, believing it would free her consciousness from temporal constraints. By morning, I was exhausted but too wired to rest. The watch read 10:27. I wounded again with shaking hands. I needed answers, and there was only one place I might find them. The theater was empty when I arrived, the construction crew not due until afternoon. I made my way to the section where I'd encountered Eliza before, her journal clutched in my hand like a talisman. Eliza, I called into the cavernous space. I know you're here. Or you can be here. I read your journal. I need to understand. Silence answered me. I waited, pacing the worn floorboards, occasionally checking the watch in my pocket. 9:18. After nearly an hour, I felt the air change, a subtle shift in pressure, a drop in temperature. The hairs on my arms stood on end. You brought my journal. Her voice came from behind me. I turned to find her standing near the stage, wearing the same gray dress from our first meeting. I need to know the truth, Eliza. All of it. The truth is complicated. She moved toward me with that strange, gliding gait. Some of it you may not be ready to hear. Try me. Because right now, I'm questioning my sanity. I held up the photograph of us together. How is this possible? I wasn't alive in 1954. Not in this timeline. No. She took the photograph from me with delicate fingers. But in another branch of possibility, you were born in 1922. We met in 1950 at this very theater during a production of Macbeth. You were an architect even then, working on restoring the building after a minor fire. That's not possible. Many things that seem impossible are merely unlikely. Yes, you said that before. I ran a hand through my hair in frustration. You're talking about parallel universes now? Not exactly. More like potential timelines that collapsed when certain decision points passed. She returned the photograph to me. In that timeline, we fell in love. We were to be married. But I discovered something, a mathematical certainty of catastrophe. An event that would occur in 2025 that would destroy everything. I tried to warn people, but no one would listen. What catastrophe? A resonance cascade. The collapse of temporal boundaries on a massive scale. Her eyes grew distant. I realized I could use my research to move through time, to find you in another timeline, one where we might still prevent it. Why me? What could I possibly do about some physics apocalypse? Because in every potential timeline I've observed, you are always at the nexus point at the critical moment. Always in this theater, always at 3:47 on May 24th, 2025. Her gaze intensified. Sometimes you cause the cascade. Sometimes you prevent it. It depends on the choices you make, choices influenced by your memories, your experiences. I checked the watch. 8:54. And this countdown? It's tracking the temporal distance to the event. As we get closer, my ability to manifest here grows stronger, but also more dangerous. She gestured around us. Reality doesn't like paradoxes, Nathan. My presence here is straining the fabric of your timeline. That's why you're experiencing anomalies, the burn marks, the photographs appearing, your dreams. You're saying that in 1 week, something happens in this theater that could. What? In the world? Not the world. Just all possible versions of it where human consciousness exists as we understand it. She spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. The cascade would collapse all potential timelines into a single, fixed reality, one where free will becomes an illusion, where every decision is predetermined. That sounds like philosophical nonsense. To someone without the mathematical framework to understand it, perhaps. She wasn't offended. But I've calculated it thousands of times, across dozens of potential timelines. The result is always the same unless a specific intervention occurs. And what intervention is that? She hesitated. I can't tell you directly. It has to be your choice, made freely, or it creates another paradox. So what am I supposed to do? Just trust the ghost of a woman who died before I was born? Who claims I exist in other timelines? Who talks about the end of free will like it's an upcoming train departure? My voice had risen to echo through the empty theater. You don't have to trust me. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the unusual depth in her green eyes. Trust yourself. There's a reason you're drawn to this theater, to this restoration project specifically. There's a reason you recognize me despite having no conscious memory of our connection. Coincidence. There are no coincidences, Nathan. Only patterns we haven't recognized yet. She reached out, her hand hovering near my cheek without touching it. When Emily died, you stopped believing in meaning. You've been sleepwalking through existence. But you're here now, at this nexus point, because some part of you remembers what's at stake. The mention of Emily's name hit me like a physical blow. How do you know about Emily? I know everything about you, across all your potential timelines. In some, you never met her. In others, she lived. In this one. She trailed off, compassion in her gaze. Your grief has been a constant companion for 7 years. It shaped you, hardened you, made you skeptical of anything that can't be measured or proven. Stop it. I stepped back, suddenly afraid, not of her, but of the uncanny accuracy of her words. I'm sorry. She withdrew her almost touch. But time is running out. The watch? I pulled it from my pocket. 8:01. Keep it wound, she insisted. It's not just tracking time, it's maintaining the connection between us. Between all potential versions of us. This is insane. Perhaps. But insanity and truth aren't mutually exclusive. She smiled sadly. I'll find you again before the end. Remember me, Nathan. Not just my face or my name, but the feeling you get when I'm near. That recognition goes deeper than memory. Before I could respond, she faded from view, not disappearing instantly, but gradually becoming transparent until nothing remained. I stood alone in the theater, clutching a watch counting down to an apocalypse I didn't understand, wondering if I had finally lost my mind. The week that followed warped and twisted like a fever dream. Reality seemed increasingly thin, transparent in places, revealing glimpses of something else behind it. I continued working on the theater restoration, drawn there by forces I couldn't explain. The watch required winding more frequently as the countdown continued. 7:23, 6:59, 5:41. Each time I checked it, the hands had moved backward despite my efforts. My apartment began displaying strange anomalies. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Rooms seemed larger or smaller than they should be. Sometimes I'd enter my kitchen to find it momentarily transformed into an older version of itself, with appliances from decades past, before it snapped back to normal when I blinked. I started seeing Eliza more frequently, though not always clearly. She would appear in reflections, or as a silhouette at the edge of my vision. Occasionally, I'd hear her voice without seeing her at all, fragments of sentences that made little sense out of context. The equations don't account for emotional variables. Catastrophic temporal folding if the nexus point ruptures. Remember the theater balcony, where we first. Sleep became a foreign country I visited only briefly. When I did manage to drift off, the dreams were vivid and disorienting. Memories that couldn't be mine of a life with Eliza in the 1950s, of working on the same theater, of discussing theories about time and consciousness over dinners in places that no longer existed. I woke from these dreams with perfect recall of details I couldn't possibly know. The exact pattern of the wallpaper in Eliza's study in the Harrison house, the smell of her father's pipe tobacco, the way she took her coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. 3 days before the supposed catastrophe, I found myself researching temporal physics, trying to make sense of Eliza's theories. Much of it remained beyond my understanding, but certain concepts began to resonate. Quantum entanglement, observer effect, the possibility that consciousness itself might exist outside linear time. I came across a recent paper by a physicist at MIT that referenced Eliza's work directly, calling it remarkably prescient given the limitations of scientific understanding in the 1950s, and noting that her equations for temporal resonance had significant mathematical validity when viewed through the lens of modern quantum theory. The watch read 3:22 now. Less than 4 days remaining. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printouts of physics papers, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Emily's name, Emily, who had been dead for 7 years. My hand trembled as I answered. Hello. Static filled the line, punctuated by what sounded like a woman's voice speaking underwater. I strained to make out the words. Nexus point, already changing, remember us. The call disconnected. When I tried to call back, an automated message informed me the number was not in service. I checked my call history. There was no record of the call. The next morning, I received a visit from Daniel, a colleague from my architectural firm who had become concerned about my increasingly erratic behavior at work. You don't look well, he observed, standing awkwardly in my living room, surveying the chaos of papers, books, and scribbled notes that had overtaken the space. Everyone's worried about you. I'm fine, I lied. Just been doing some research for the theater project. He picked up one of my notebooks, frowning at the diagrams and equations I'd copied from Eliza's journal. This doesn't look like architectural research, Nathan. This looks crazy, I supplied when he hesitated. I was going to say concerning. He set down the notebook carefully. Listen, I know this time of year is hard for you because of Emily. Maybe you should take some real time off. See someone. A therapist, you mean? It might help. His gaze softened with genuine concern. You've been talking to yourself at work. Jessica said she heard you having a full conversation in an empty room at the theater yesterday. I hadn't been aware of that. Had my interactions with Eliza become so real that I was visibly engaging with her even when she wasn't fully manifested? I'm just tired, I insisted. Not sleeping well. That's obvious. Daniel's eyes landed on the antique watch sitting amid my papers. This is a nice piece. Family heirloom. Something like that. I resisted the urge to check it again. After Daniel left, promising to cover for me at work if I needed more time off, I retrieved the watch. 2:53. I spent the remainder of the day at the theater, drawn there as if by gravitational pull. The restoration work was nearly complete, the ornate plasterwork repaired, the stage refinished, the vintage lighting fixtures reinstalled. In 2 days, there would be a small ceremony to celebrate the completion, with city officials and donors in attendance. May 24th, at 3:30 p.m. The realization hit me like ice water. The ceremony would be happening at almost exactly the time Eliza had specified for the resonance cascade. As I stood center stage, contemplating this coincidence that was no coincidence, Eliza appeared in the front row of seats. Today she looked more solid than before, almost fully corporeal. You understand now, she said, not a question, but an observation. The ceremony, I replied. Something happens during the ceremony. She nodded, rising to join me on stage. In every timeline, the restoration is celebrated at this exact moment. The specific people change, the details shift, but the event itself is constant. What causes the cascade? A structural failure? Some kind of accident? Nothing so mundane. She stood beside me now, close enough that I should have felt her body heat, but there was only a slight chill in the air around her. The theater itself is a temporal anomaly, a place where the barriers between potential realities are naturally thin. My experiment in 1954 thinned them further. And your restoration work, using the original materials, following the original plans so meticulously, you're essentially recreating the conditions that made my temporal displacement possible. So the ceremony triggers some kind of what? Time explosion. More like a collapse. Too many versions of the same moment overlapping, observed simultaneously across multiple planes of existence. Her hand moved toward mine, but stopped short of touching, as always. The observer effect is powerful, Nathan. Dozens of people, all focusing their attention on this space at this moment. It creates a pressure point in temporal fabric. And how am I supposed to stop it? Cancel the ceremony? That wouldn't work. The event would simply shift to another date, another configuration. The pressure has built too much to be dissipated so easily. She looked around the theater wistfully. Besides, in timelines where the ceremony doesn't occur, something worse happens. A fire, like the one that consumed my home. More deaths. Then what? What am I supposed to do? When the moment comes, you'll know. Her form flickered briefly. I've interfered too much already. Giving you direct instructions would only ensure failure. That's not helpful, Eliza. I know. Sadness filled her eyes. But I've seen every possible outcome. The only successful ones are those where you act on your own understanding, not on my direction. She began to fade again, becoming translucent. Wait, I called. At least tell me what happens if I fail. What does this resonance cascade actually do? Her voice came faintly as her image dissipated. It collapses all potential timelines into one fixed reality. No choices, no free will, no chance to learn from mistakes or grow from suffering. Just one predetermined path, forever. Then she was gone, leaving me alone on the stage with more questions than answers. The watch read 2:26. I spent the final 2 days in a state of hypervigilance, alternating between the theater and my apartment. Sleep came in brief, turbulent bursts. When awake, I experienced increasing temporal anomalies, moments where my surroundings would shift briefly to appear as they might have in the 1950s, objects disappearing and reappearing in different positions, the occasional glimpse of people who vanished when directly observed. The morning of May 24th arrived with unnaturally still air and a sky the color of brushed steel. The watch read 0:04, just 4 hours remaining until whatever was supposed to happen at 3:47 p.m. I arrived at the theater early, before the staff preparing for the ceremony. Everything looked normal on the surface, but there was a subtle wrongness to the atmosphere, a tension, like the microsecond before lightning strikes. As I walked through the empty auditorium, I noticed something odd about the stage. From certain angles, it appeared to overlap with itself, as if multiple versions were occupying the same space, like double-exposed film. When I blinked, it would snap back to normal, but the effect was becoming more pronounced with each passing hour. As the morning progressed, workers arrived to set up for the ceremony, arranging chairs, testing the sound system, hanging a banner congratulating the restoration team. None of them seemed to notice the increasingly frequent ripples in reality, moments where the lights would flicker and the theater would briefly appear as it had in different eras, from its original construction to various renovations throughout the decades. But I saw them all, these temporal echoes growing stronger. And I wasn't the only one. At noon, as I inspected the balcony one final time, I saw Eliza standing at the railing, more solid and present than ever before. She wore modern clothing now, a simple black dress that could have been purchased yesterday. It's accelerating, she said without preamble. The temporal boundaries are thinning faster than in previous iterations. Previous iterations? I joined her at the railing. You mean you've lived through this day before? Many times, across many potential timelines. Her hands gripped the railing tightly. But this one feels different. The resonance is stronger, the overlap more complete. Because of you? Because you've been appearing to me. Partially. She turned to face me. But also because of you. Your grief for Emily created a fracture point in your timeline, a moment where multiple potential futures diverge dramatically. That makes you particularly sensitive to temporal anomalies. It's why you can see me when others can't. I checked the watch. 0:03. 3 hours remaining. We still haven't established what I'm supposed to do when the moment comes. I told you, I can't. I know, you can't tell me directly. Frustration edged my voice. But there must be something. Some hint. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. In the original timeline, the one where we met in the 1950s, we stood in this exact spot on opening night after the restoration was complete. You asked me to marry you. And I said yes. But then I saw something, a vision of what was coming. The cascade. I knew I had to prevent it, even if it meant losing you. Pain flickered across her features. My experiment was an attempt to find a version of you that could help me stop it. I've been searching across timelines ever since. That doesn't tell me what to do, doesn't it? She reached toward me, her hand hovering near my face as always. Think, Nathan. Why this theater? Why you? Why now? Before I could answer, she vanished, not gradually fading as before, but disappearing between one blink and the next. In her place was a small velvet box that hadn't been there moments ago. Inside was an engagement ring, antique in design. Inscribed inside the band were the words, "Time is never lost if love remains." I pocketed both the ring and the watch, my mind racing. What was I missing? What connection was I failing to see? By 2 p.m., guests had begun to arrive for the ceremony. City officials, donors, members of the Historical Society, all milling about in the lobby, admiring the restoration work, completely oblivious to the temporal anomalies that now occurred every few minutes. I moved among them like a ghost, nodding at appropriate intervals, accepting congratulations I barely heard. The watch in my pocket read 0:01, 1 hour remaining. At 3 p.m., everyone moved into the auditorium for the ceremony. Speeches began, the mayor, the head of the Historical Preservation Committee, the lead donor. I was scheduled to speak last, just before the symbolic relighting of the original chandelier at 3:45. As I sat on stage waiting my turn, reality began to fragment more noticeably. The audience would occasionally blur, revealing other audiences, people in clothing from different decades, all occupying the same seats across different times. The stage beneath me felt unstable, as if it might dissolve at any moment. No one else appeared to notice. They sat attentively listening to speeches, applauding at appropriate moments, completely unaware that they were sitting at the nexus of a temporal catastrophe. At 3:30, I was called to the podium. The watch in my pocket now read in 17 seconds, 17 minutes until 3:47. I began my prepared remarks mechanically, talking about the architectural significance of the theater, the challenges of the restoration, the importance of preserving historical spaces. But as I spoke, I saw Eliza materialize at the back of the auditorium, watching me intently. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I abandoned my script mid-sentence. This theater has always been more than just a building to me, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It exists across time, a constant in an inconstant world. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. I pressed on. We think of time as linear, past, present, future in neat sequence. But what if it's more complicated? What if every moment exists simultaneously, and our consciousness simply moves through it like a spotlight illuminating one frame of film at a time? The murmurs grew louder. From the corner of my eye, I could see the mayor shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But I also saw Eliza nodding encouragement. This building has seen countless stories unfold within its walls. Love stories, tragedies, comedies, all playing out across decades. And sometimes, I believe, those stories echo through time. They resonate. They overlap. As I spoke these words, the temporal anomalies intensified. The audience flickered more frequently, showing glimpses of other ceremonies, other gatherings spanning the theater's history. To my astonishment, some people began to notice, looking around in confusion as reality wavered around them. The watch in my pocket vibrated. 10 minutes remaining. There was a woman, I continued, my voice growing stronger. A brilliant physicist named Eliza Harrison. In 1954, she theorized that consciousness could transcend linear time under certain conditions. Most dismissed her work as fantasy. But she was right. Now the audience was openly restless, exchanging concerned glances. The mayor stood, clearly intending to intervene, but I spoke over him. Eliza Harrison died in a fire in 1954. Or so history records. But death isn't the end when time itself is malleable. I looked directly at where she stood at the back of the theater, now visible to me alone. Sometimes love creates connections that transcend conventional understanding of reality. 7 minutes. The mayor had reached the podium now. I think perhaps the pressure of this project has taken its toll on Mr. Caldwell, he said smoothly into the microphone. Let's thank him for his extraordinary work and move on to. No. I reclaimed the microphone. You need to listen. All of you. Right now, in this theater, something is happening. A convergence of timelines. A resonance cascade that could collapse all potential realities into a single, fixed path. Nervous laughter scattered through the audience. Someone near the front whispered, "Mental breakdown," loudly enough for me to hear. 5 minutes. You don't believe me. I understand. I pulled out the watch. But in 5 minutes, at exactly 3:47, you'll see for yourselves. Security was moving toward the stage now. I had precious little time. Eliza, I called out. I remember now. Not just fragments, everything. Our meeting at this theater in 1950. Your theories about temporal displacement. The night you proposed your experiment. I held up the ring box. The night I proposed to you, right here in this balcony. She was moving toward me now, walking down the center aisle, becoming increasingly visible. Some in the audience turned to look, confusion on their faces as they partially perceived her. 3 minutes. Mr. Caldwell, you need to step away from the microphone, a security guard said firmly, reaching the stage. I ignored him. Eliza believed that consciousness could be anchored across time through emotional connections, through love. I continued urgently. That's why she could find me across different timelines. That's why I could see her when no one else could. We're entangled, our consciousnesses resonating across temporal planes. 2 minutes. Security had reached me now, grasping my arm. But as they touched me, something extraordinary happened. They froze in place, along with everyone else in the theater. Only Eliza and I remained in motion, existing momentarily outside conventional time. You understand, she said, now standing before me on the stage. The anchor isn't a place or an object, I replied. It's us. Our connection. That's what you couldn't tell me directly. She nodded. In every timeline where you figured this out yourself, where you remembered us of your own volition, the cascade was prevented. In every timeline where I simply told you what to do, it failed. Because free will matters, I realized. Genuine choice, not predetermined action. Exactly. For the first time, she reached out and actually touched my face, her fingers warm and solid against my skin. Our connection creates a paradox, one that can either stabilize or destroy the temporal fabric, depending on how it manifests. 1 minute. What happens now? I asked, acutely aware of time slipping away. Now we anchor each other. She took my hands in hers. Not just across time, but across all potential realities. How? By choosing each other. Not because of destiny or predetermined fate, but freely, with full understanding of what it means. The watch in my pocket began to tick loudly, counting down the final seconds. I choose you, Nathan, she said. Across all timelines, all possibilities, I choose you. And I choose you, Eliza, I replied, understanding flowing through me like an electric current. Not because I'm supposed to, but because I want to. As the watch ticked its final second, I slipped the ring onto her finger. The moment it settled in place, reality shattered around us. The world dissolved into fractals of light and sound, a kaleidoscopic breakdown of time and space. I saw every potential version of the theater simultaneously, from its construction to its eventual demolition centuries in the future. I saw myself and Eliza across dozens of timelines, meeting, loving, losing each other in endless permutations. For what might have been seconds or eternities, we existed in this state of temporal superposition, witnessing the vast web of causality that connected every decision, every moment, every possibility. Then, gradually, reality began to reconstitute itself around us. The theater took shape again, but it was different, a composite of multiple versions existing in quantum superposition. The audience reappeared, no longer frozen but moving in slow motion as temporal stability reasserted itself. Eliza remained solid beside me, her hand warm in mine, the ring glinting on her finger. What happened? I whispered. Did we stop it? Not exactly. Her voice was clear, no longer ethereal. We redirected it. Instead of collapsing all timelines into one fixed reality, we've created a nexus point where multiple timelines can coexist without contradicting each other. Is that even possible? It wasn't supposed to be. Wonder filled her voice. This is an entirely new configuration, one I never calculated. Gradually, the audience returned to normal speed. But strangely, they didn't seem alarmed or confused. They simply continued watching the stage as if nothing unusual had occurred. Because for them, nothing had. They can't perceive the change, Eliza explained, following my gaze. Their consciousness isn't attuned to temporal anomalies the way ours are now. So what happens next? Before she could answer, the world shifted again, not violently this time, but like the gentle turning of a page. The theater dissolved around us, reforming as my apartment. But it wasn't quite my apartment. The furniture was different, a blend of my modern minimalist pieces and antiques I'd never owned. Photographs lined the walls, images of Eliza and me throughout a life we hadn't yet lived together, spanning decades. We're in a composite timeline, Eliza said, moving through the space with the familiarity of someone coming home. A new branch of reality created from the resonance between our consciousnesses. How is this possible? I followed her, examining the photographs with bewilderment. These memories, they never happened. Not in your original timeline, no, but they happened in others. She turned to face me. When we chose each other at the nexus point, we created something unprecedented, a consciousness bridge that allows us to access memories from multiple timelines simultaneously. So these are real? These moments actually occurred. In certain branches of possibility, yes. She picked up a photograph showing us on a beach I didn't recognize. And now they're part of our shared reality. Over the days that followed, I discovered what it meant to exist in a composite timeline. Memories that weren't mine, or hadn't been mine, began to surface, integrating seamlessly with my original recollections. I remembered meeting Eliza in the 1950s and in 2023 simultaneously. I remembered proposing to her in the theater balcony both 7 decades ago and just days before. Most strangely, I remembered Emily both dying in the accident and recovering from it, 2 contradictory realities that somehow coexisted in my mind without conflict. The world around us reflected this composite state. Technology existed that shouldn't have been possible for decades, alongside anachronistic elements from earlier eras. Most people seemed unconscious of these contradictions, their minds automatically reconciling temporal inconsistencies. But some, those who had been in the theater during the cascade, occasionally showed signs of temporal awareness. The mayor would sometimes pause mid-sentence, looking confused, as if momentarily perceiving the multiple realities layered around him. A donor from the Historical Society once asked me about that woman who appeared during your speech, though official records showed no such incident. Eliza explained that we had become temporal anchors, stable points in an unstable reality. Our conscious choice to accept all potential timelines rather than forcing reality into a single predetermined path had created a new kind of existence, one where possibility remained fluid rather than fixed. Is it permanent? I asked one evening as we stood on the balcony of our apartment, the same apartment that was simultaneously mine alone and ours together. This composite reality? Nothing is permanent, she replied. But it's stable. As long as we remain anchors, as long as we continue to choose this reality freely, it will persist. And if we don't, then the cascade would resume. All potential timelines would collapse into a single fixed path. She leaned against me. Free will would become an illusion. So we're guardians of possibility, I mused. Custodians of choice. In a manner of speaking, yes. She smiled. Though most people will never know it. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel reality waver around me, brief glimpses of other versions of our life together, paths not taken, choices unmade. In those moments, I reach for Eliza, anchoring myself in our shared decision, our mutual choice to exist in this impossible space between certainty and potential. The watch sits on our bedside table now, its hands perpetually showing 3:47. It no longer requires winding. Eliza says it exists in perfect quantum superposition, simultaneously counting down to catastrophe and measuring the moment of our salvation. I don't fully understand the physics of what happened that day in the theater. I'm not sure anyone could. But I understand enough to know that when a stranger says, "Remember me," sometimes they're not asking you to recall the past. Sometimes they're inviting you to create a future where memory transcends time itself. They tell me I'm improving. Dr. Mercer says the new medication is helping to integrate the fractured aspects of my reality perception, whatever that means. The hallucinations are less frequent now. Days pass without Eliza appearing to me. They call it Capgras adjacent temporal displacement disorder, a rare condition triggered by severe trauma and grief. Apparently, after Emily's death, my mind constructed an elaborate fantasy involving time travel and parallel realities, centered around a woman who never existed. They showed me the historical records. There was a Harrison house fire in 1954, but no Eliza Harrison ever lived there. The theater renovation was my project, but there was no ceremony that day. I had a breakdown before it could take place, claiming that reality was collapsing around us. The antique watch they found in my possession belonged to my grandfather. The ring was Emily's, the one I had given her before the accident. The journal filled with temporal physics was in my own handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it. Dr. Mercer says this is progress, my ability to distinguish between the fantasy I created and objective reality. He says it's common for the mind to construct elaborate scenarios to escape unbearable grief, to create meaning where there is only random tragedy. Sometimes I believe him. Sometimes the composite timeline theory seems absurd, a manifestation of my desperate need to believe that Emily's death wasn't random, that it served some greater purpose in maintaining the fabric of reality itself. But then I'll catch a glimpse of Eliza in a mirror when no one is watching. Or I'll notice the hands on my grandfather's watch briefly move backward before correcting themselves. Or I'll remember details of quantum physics I never studied. Last week, I found a photograph tucked between the pages of a book I don't remember buying. It showed Eliza and me standing in front of the restored theater. When I showed it to Dr. Mercer, he saw only me standing alone. Memory is unreliable, he reminded me gently, especially for someone with your condition. I nodded and apologized for the confusion. But later, when I looked at the photograph again, I noticed something written on the back in elegant script. Reality is consensus. Choose carefully what you agree to remember. So here I am, balanced between two possible interpretations of my experience. Either I am recovering from a psychotic break triggered by unresolved grief, gradually returning to consensus reality. Or consensus reality itself is a comfortable fiction, a single timeline we collectively agree to remember because the alternative, the vast, terrifying ocean of possibility that surrounds us, is too much for most minds to comprehend. Either I imagined Eliza as an escape from unbearable loss, or Eliza found me across time because love creates anchors that even death cannot erode. I don't know which version is true anymore. Perhaps both are. Perhaps neither. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the restored theater, where I'm still permitted to visit occasionally as part of my reintegration therapy, I stand on the stage and whisper her name. And sometimes, just sometimes, I feel the air change around me, reality thinning momentarily. And I make my choice again. I choose possibility over certainty. I choose to remember.